The kinds of insects I would like us to direct our attention to during the next two brief talks are those that are entering the internal parts of the plant of fruit trees and shrubs. So insects that tunnel twigs, stems, branches, and the crown area of the fruit crops. And the most damaging of these are those that are at the crown. And by this I mean the crown of at the root zone, the root crown area. And that is largely due to a single species that is particularly important, the peach tree borer. This is an insect that is damaging to essentially all species of commonly grown prunus. In prunus, the stone fruits include things like peach and plum and cherry and almonds and again, a lot of plants that we grow both as fruit trees and in ornamental settings too. And it is a fairly aggressive borer. It is one that does well here and can be damaging. It attacks the base of the plant, and a common name that is often used is associated with is the peach crown borer, because again the area of attack is going to be right at the upper level of the roots, kind of at the soil line and just beneath it. Now this is a moth. The adult form is a moth. It's in the family of borers we call the clear-wing borers. That is a group that has larvae that develop as borers in various kinds of plants. And one of the things about the clearing borers is the adult form of these are moths that actually often mimic wasps or other stinging insects. So you can see the female on the left and the male on the right are kind of unusual looking moths, and they're also unusual that they will fly during the day, which is something most moths will not. Again, their appearance to be something similar to a stinging insect is what allows them to have this day flying habit. So here we see a mating pair of peach tree borers, male and the female. The male is quite a bit smaller than the female. Now, being moths, they can't chew in the adult form, so they just simply glue their eggs onto the surface of the bark. And so we see some eggs here glued onto the bark, and these are glued onto the bark almost always very near the soil line. The eggs hatch, the larvae then move into the base of the plant, developing underneath the bark. So peach tree borer larvae are going to be almost entirely concentrated around the base of the plant, and what you'll see is a kind of rough gouging wound being made by the larva. And since these are stone fruits, the genus Prunus, you also get quite a bit of goo, a sap that flows from response to this wounding. The larvae are indicated here, full grown. They might be an inch or so. They might look like several other kind of borers you might see in a tree or shrub, but these are a kind of clear-wing borer. And a little review here. The way you can tell that these are going to be a larva of some kind of moth is by flipping them over and looking at the underside, and they have prolegs, and that's what's indicated here on the lower right. So here we have two pictures of the peach tree borer here, supplied to me by a colleague, David Shetler. The dorsal view, you can't see the prolegs, of course, but you flip them over, and there are those short prolegs with those little crotchets, those little hooks that indicate that this is some kind of Lepidoptera larva. And if it's a Lepidoptera larva that is boring in a tree, it's usually in the family of clear-wing borers. When they're done feeding, they create a cocoon, and they create a cocoon of silk that is mixed with leaf fragments. Now, the picture on the left here is a picture of a fairly small diameter plum that was killed by this insect, and the soil line is just about where you see the cocoon that's indicated by the arrow. That's where it had pupated. The moth is left in that picture. In the upper right, you see what a cocoon would look like with the pupa extracted from it. And when the moth leaves, they will pull that old pupal skin out as the adults emerge. So in the picture on the lower left here, it's a little hard to see, but we have a couple pupal skins that have the cocoon and the extruded pupal skins coming out of them. And out of that came either an adult female or an adult male, indicated in the left and the right. Now, this is an insect that is fairly aggressive and sometimes will need intervention in order to have optimally producing plants. The optimum time for this insect is when eggs are hatching and before the larvae have entered the bark. This is an insect that you have limited options to manage it after it has entered the plant, but the eggs are laid on the bark. The larvae feed for a very brief time on the bark, but are exposed at that time and can be easily killed during this period of exposure. So when does this happen? How do you know when the peach tree borer is going to be out and about and laying eggs? Well, this is one kind of insect that is very effectively monitored to get the timing right by use of these pheromone traps. These are traps that have the sex pheromone of the female. They are attractive, highly attractive to the males. And when we catch males in the trap, this indicates the insect adult stage is active. Now, usually the females are a little behind, so maybe a week or so after the males start to peak, you're going to have peak female activity. But they're very attracted to this. Now, the kind of pheromone that we'd use is a standard clearing borer lure. There's lots of lures that are used for different kinds of insects. Actually, the one that attracts this insect is kind of a generic one, and it actually is attracted to several of the species. Very widely available, and perhaps one of the things you might be interested in looking at is some of the suppliers of pheromones and seeing what kind of things are out there. But we'll talk about that later. There are lots of clearing borers in Colorado. The clearing borer moths are a group of wood borers or stem borers that show up in lots of different places, and I'll talk all about them a lot when we talk about trees and shrubs in the third section of this class. But peach tree borer is arguably the most aggressive and damaging of all of these. By the way, the reason the clearwing borers get their name is that the moths with that wasp-like appearance have clear wings. In large part, the wings are not often completely covered with scales, so that's where they get the clear wing borer name. So these are moths that try to look like wasps, and as part of that kind of confusing appearance, they will have wings that have part of it often absent of scales. Now, that being said, the pheromone traps with peach tree borer lure will catch some other clearing borers. So if you're monitoring for peach tree borer, you will get a couple other species. Most commonly, you'll get what's called the lilac ash borer, which is a clearwing borer that is found in lilac, ash, and maybe privet. So do be aware that you'll get mostly clearwing borers in this trap, but not just the peach tree borer. So what do we do about peach tree borer? This is an insect that, again, is fairly aggressive. The kind of damage it does, this gouging at the base of the plant, can girdle the plant, can prevent a lot of movement of nutrients to the plant, making it less efficient. And it has got only modest natural controls that maintain its levels at low level, or level below damaging points. So it's not uncommon that people would consider using preventive sprays to kill the insect before it enters the base of the plant. And this is an insect that is treated, if you do use insecticides, at the time of egg laying. It's exposed at egg laying, and this is usually sometime around the 4th of July, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit later, but pheromone traps will tell you that. An insecticide applied at this time on the trunk that has some persistence of activity, such as permethrin or carbaryl, can pretty well kill the larvae that are going to hatch from most of the eggs that are laid during that year. Now, there is another option. Not as consistently effective, but one that others may consider, and that would be a soil drench against the larvae. And the only thing that would work against the larvae, now this is after they've already hatched, would be insect parasitic nematodes. These insect parasitic nematodes, entomopathogenic nematodes, we talked about these a little bit earlier in the last class. These are commercially available, a couple different genera, and pretty much all of the largely available insect parasitic nematodes would kill a peach tree borer larva if it could get to it. And so these commercially available nematodes are usually mixed in some sort of semi-moist media, then they are put into water, and then you would drench it around the base of the plant. You'll get some control, maybe not 100%, but this is an option if you don't want to go for the preventive insecticide route on the trunk of the tree at the time they're laying eggs. So this would be applied when you have larvae, and when you have larvae, it would be a little later in the summer. One thing about nematodes, though, is that they can only be active if the soil temperature is warm. So this would be a summer or late fall, or early fall, kind of treatment. If the soil temperatures start to approach 50 degrees, then the nematodes won't move. They won't be able to successfully infect any insects. So the peach tree borer is the #1 crown borer that we have in fruit. But there is another one, not nearly as commonly encountered, but also needs mention, and that would be the one we see in raspberry, the raspberry crown borer. Attacks raspberry and a couple other closely related rubus species. The adult is a moth in the clearing borer moth family, as is the peach tree borer, and it has a close mimicry of a yellow jacket. It looks like a yellow jacket wasp, and similarly it flies during the day. Now the wings are not completely clear, but again the overall appearance is one of a wasp, and these are day-flying moths that get away with looking like a wasp, a stinging insect. Of course they can't sting. They'll lay eggs around the base of the plant. The eggs will hatch. The larvae will move into the lower part of the plant at the crown area. Again, this is a crown borer. So in this picture we see an area of the raspberry plant that shows a little bit of activity on the left of the picture. You can see a little bit of frass, we call it, the excrement being produced, and that is an indication there's some sort of chewing injury associated with that point. And if you were to cut away, you would find that caterpillar in the lower left of this picture, the raspberry crown borer caterpillar that is in the base of this raspberry plant that is producing that. So you can see the kind of injury that this is doing, like a peach tree borer is doing, is a kind of rough gouging of the lower stem area of the plant, the crown area of the plant. Peach tree borer pheromone does not attract raspberry crown borer. There is a lure specific to the species. It's commercially available. It's a little harder to find, but it is out there. But what do you do about it? Well, if we're talking about backyard situations, really we don't have many options. There is not an insecticide that is legal to use on raspberries or similar caneberries to control borers. So what we're left with are these insect parasitic nematodes. And again, these would be used as a soil drench against the larvae. So this would be a midsummer treatment, drenched in a lot of water, and then maybe watered in additionally with some irrigation. But these can be fairly effective, and in general the raspberry crown borer does have robust natural enemies, so it's not an insect that we see as chronically being damaging as the peach tree borer.